On the morning of the 26th of March 2013, a car would enter Arklow South Pier and plunge into the dark, cold water. 2 people would enter the water, but only one would come out alive. Was it a terrible accident or something more sinister? I have my own opinion, but I will leave it to you to decide. Arklow town can be found in County Wicklow on the southeast coast of Ireland. It was founded by the Vikings in the 9th century. It is also one of the busiest ports and is a renowned centre for boat building and sea fishing, as well as having a fine tradition in the pottery industry. Our case today begins in the Brook Lodge Hotel, a 4-star hotel set in a secluded part of County Wicklow. Here Csaba Orsus and Martha Herda worked side by side. Csaba, 31, was a Hungarian national and worked at the hotel long before Martha. He had seen her before she started working at the hotel, when she would come in to have dinner with her friends. By the time of the crash, they would have known each other for around 2 years. Csaba had moved to Ireland for a better life and his brother lived here already, so it was an easy transition for him. He worked hard, barely taking a day off, and would take any shift he was given. He loved Ireland and his prized possession was his BMW, and he was proud to own such a car. He took pride in his appearance and worked out at the gym and dressed very well. His brother would say he was a kind and gentle soul. His main goal in life was to have a good job and hopefully have a wife and family to provide for. He came from a good, solid, close family, and even though he was always working, he did make time to keep in contact with his mother and family. Marta was born in Poland in 1987 and had moved to Ireland when she was 18 years of age. She had been living in Ireland around 5 years when she got a job at the Brook Lodge Hotel near Akron. In the following years, she would be moved to reception. And note, to hold this position, her English would have had to been very good. This will become relevant as the case evolves. On the morning of Tuesday, the 26th of March 2013, a security guard working at the small harbour in Arklow, County Wicklow, had begun his patrol of the area at around 5:40 a.m, just as the sky started to lighten. As he made his rounds, he heard the noise of a car in the area coming from the direction of the town. He said from the noise of the engine it was coming at high speed. He expected to see a car parked at the harbour on his grounds, but there was no sign of one, which he would say was odd. He then heard the screams of a woman, faint at first, but then he saw a woman running in the direction of the town. He shouted out to her, but she did not respond. He could tell she was speaking in Polish. She was soaking wet and very, very distressed. He then rang the Gardaí and told them what had happened and asked them to come down to the harbour. When they arrived at the harbour, Gardaí went looking for the woman and located her not far. She was soaking wet, shaking and frothing from the mouth. The woman told the Gardaí, quote, "He's in the water, you have to help," while she pointed in the direction of the South Quay. Of course the woman was 29-year-old Martha, and the man that had been in the car with her was Csaba. The Gardaí had arrived with the sub-aqua team and began searching the water for Martha's gold-coloured Volkswagen Passat car. Rescuers spotted the car but had difficulty getting close to it, as the water was moving it and swaying it in the harbour. A technical examination began to establish what had caused the car to go off the pier. Damage was noted to the crash barrier at the edge of the pier, and a car bumper was seen caught on the rails, and an ESB electrical box was also damaged at the scene. At about 3 p.m, a crane arrived at the scene, and the car, which had been found upside down on the bottom of the harbour, was lifted out of the water. A crowd at this stage had gathered, including friends of Marta and Csaba's brother. As the car began to be lifted out of the water, it was soon obvious that Csaba was not in it. His brother felt helpless that he could not help to find his brother as he could not swim. It would turn out he was not the only one unable to swim, as Csaba was not able to swim either. Search and rescue continued to search for Csaba along the coast. but it was hard going as the water was particularly choppy that day. Meanwhile, Gardaí attended to Marta and tried to find out what happened. She was transported to Loughlinstown Hospital as she had gone into the water and was suffering from hypothermia, but had not sustained any injuries. That afternoon, Gardaí would get a phone call from a member of the public to say a body had washed up at Clogher Beach, 2 miles south of Arklow town. These remains were provisionally identified as Casaba's, and it was believed that his body had been briefly washed out to sea after the crash. Following the discovery of the remains, the Gardaí were anxious to speak to Marta. Once word got out that Casaba was found, tributes of flowers and cards were laid along the pier, and friends started opening up to the Gardaí of Casaba's state of mind months before the crash. They said he was posting messages online, that he was broken-hearted and wanted to be left alone. One said that Casaba had been in love with a woman, and after she rejected him, his behaviour had started to change dramatically. This I'm not buying myself, as what will come out later will show that in fact while he may have been initially upset, he was prepared to move on. Men can only take so much crap from a woman, but on with the story. Once Casaba's body was formally identified, his family planned to repatriate him. This would be costly, and so his brother sold his own car and Casaba's car, and donations from family and friends made it possible for his body to be sent home to Hungary. The Gardaí made an offer to have him cremated to cut down on costs, but Casaba's mother insisted on seeing him one last time and for his body to be buried, and so the €4,000 was raised and he was brought home. Over 500 people attended the funeral on the 6th of April 2013, alongside his heartbroken and shocked family. Marta was released from the hospital the day after the crash and assisted the Gardaí with their inquiries. Months later, on August 2nd, 2013, Marta was arrested in connection with Casaba's death and was questioned and released that evening. On her release, a Garda said to her, "Send us a postcard," when she stated that she was going home to Poland for a holiday. How true this is, I'm unsure, as this information comes from Marta and her family, and it was never confirmed by the Gardaí that this was said, but still, this is really bad taste. Marta would go on to send a greetings card to the Gardaí, containing 4 postcards while in Poland on a holiday. Good wishes was written on the card itself. The first postcard said, quote, "Hello from Poland." The second, "Kiss, kiss, kiss" from Marta Herda and family. The third, "Hope you have not much work," and a smiley face. And finally, the fourth said, "Take care." She also attached a coin, which the Gardaí could not understand its meaning. And in my research, I discovered it was a symbol of a keepsake from another country, just like people collecting stamps. The Gardaí were baffled by receiving these postcards and saw them as a red herring, so they did a DNA test on the stamp and confirmed they were from Marta. Let's just say Marta didn't do herself any favours here. If you are under suspicion of a crime, the last thing you do is take the piss out of the Gardaí. The Gardaí, in the meantime, had commissioned several experts to complete reports to understand how the car ended up in the South Quay harbour. CCTV and phone records had been gathered, and a file was being prepared for the DPP. On the morning of October the 10th, 2014, Marta was arrested at her home in Ireland. She had returned to Ireland and tried many different jobs, but could not hold down one. So rather than return to Poland, she decided to sponge off the Irish state instead, as our social welfare system is a lot better here. She was taken to Arklow Garda Station and charged with the murder of Casaba. The following day she appeared at Bray District Court, and with the help of an interpreter, here we go, suddenly she needs an interpreter. After spending nearly 10 years in Ireland, working front desk at an exclusive hotel, give me a break. She sobbed through the hearing and became increasingly upset when the judge remanded her into custody. Oh, poor baby. A week later, her bail was approved at Cloverhill District Court, and the matter was adjourned to Arklow District Court, where an independent suretor could be secured. €4,000 was lodged, and Marta entered a bond herself for €500. As a condition of her bail, she had to surrender her passport, adhere to a curfew, and sign on at the Garda station daily. She also had to provide the addresses of her parents and siblings. The following month, the case was sent forward for trial at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. On July 16, 2016, Marta appeared at the Central Criminal Court charged with murder. She pleaded not guilty. 8 men and 4 women were on the jury. The DPP began with their opening statement and stated that Marta's statement that she had first given to Gardaí was in fact a lie. She said that Casaba had confronted her at her house on the morning of the killing, but this was proven to be a lie. In fact, that morning she had called to his house and they had driven through the town together. Phone evidence would show that Marta had lured Casaba out of his bed in the early hours of the morning. The evidence showed that he had not intended to be away from home. He had left the front door wide open when he presumably went outside to speak with Marta that morning. A housemate of Casaba's would later testify that she had returned home earlier that night and closed the door behind her, but when she awoke the next morning it was wide open. This proved that Casaba was not intending to be away from his home. The DPP also stated that witnesses had also heard a car driving at speed down by the quay, which was for all purposes like a runway, and expert witnesses that examined the road showed that Martin made no attempt to slow down, and they would show how she deliberately drove her car down by South Quay Pier, crashed through a barrier into the dark, cold water, with no intentions of stopping. The water was fast-flowing, tidal, and deep to allow large boats to dock there. The car was driven at great speed through 2 barriers into the sea by a woman who knew her passenger Casaba could not swim. The objective showed, quote, that Marta, in a deliberate act, drove through these barriers with the driver's window down. Marta could swim, the deceased could not, but she knew this. Casaba's death was caused by drowning and not by any injuries he had sustained on impact into the water. The DPP also said they would show evidence on how Casaba ended up in Marta's car that morning. On the second day of the trial, a man entered the witness box and stated that on the morning of the 26th of March 2013, at around 5:20 a.m, he was walking along the Wexford Road on his way to work when he came upon a gold-coloured car that was semi-parked with the engine running. He said it was unusual to meet any cars at this time of the morning, and it was very distinctive as it had black eyelashes on the headlights of the car. Inside was a woman alone on the phone, and she seemed very animated. He said as he continued his route to work, the same car passed him later, and the woman was still on her phone. He was able to identify himself on CCTV later, which was shown to the court. Next to the stand was a postman who stated that while on his rounds that morning, he had found the front door of Casaba's home open. Garda Hall was next on the stand, and he gave evidence that Marta owned 2 phones. One was mainly used to contact Casaba, and on the morning of his death, she had made 10 calls between 5:06 and 5:17 to a mutual friend of hers and Casaba's, all of which went unanswered. At around 5:35 a.m, she made 3 phone calls to Casaba, in which the last one was answered and lasted around 2 minutes. In the days before Casaba's death, Marta had rung him 12 times. 8 of those calls were from her other number. Casaba had rung her 13 times and sent 9 texts. 2 women were then put on the stand to testify. They both lived near the harbour, and as their morning began, it was disturbed by screaming and shouting. The first woman stated that she heard Marta saying, quote, "Help me, I've been raped." And the second woman said she heard the same thing when she left her house to see what was going on. When they were both cross-examined by the defence, the First Lady admitted that she may have misheard, but the second woman stuck to what she said she had heard, that Martha was saying she had been raped. Mary Cassidy, the state pathologist, took to the stand also. She found blood-stained froth in Casaba's mouth and said that his lungs were overinflated and double the normal weight. The injuries were consistent with drowning. The 5th day of the trial began on Monday, and Martha's statements to the Gardaí after she had driven the car into the water were read out to the jury. These statements were taken while she was still in hospital, and later when she was released and asked to go to Arklow Garda station. Martha explained that she worked with Casaba and had met him 2 years before, but Casaba had told her he'd remember meeting her before this when she went to Brook Lodge Hotel for dinner with her friends. He told her he even recalled what she was wearing on that occasion. She said Casaba was in love with her and effectively stalking her. He contacted her and her friends, and he would tell people they were in a relationship. They were not. She alleged Casaba had come to her home and her friends' homes uninvited and would see him wherever she went, whether it be the local Tesco or Dublin airport. Martha said that he would tell people they were sleeping together, but that wasn't true, and he would sit beside her at work and try and hold her hand. She said her colleagues found it funny, but she didn't. She said the management were aware of it, as he had skipped work to go see her. By the time the 2nd year of them knowing each other came round, she was more and more upset by it. She told the Gardaí, quote, "I once got angry with him, but he likes me angry. He likes my eyes." She also said she had a friend go speak to Casaba's brother to ask him to stay away from her. This lasted for 3 weeks. Martha also said that she had not spoken to him in the 3 months before the killing. She said that when she started working at the Brook Lodge Hotel and getting this unwarranted attention from Casaba, she started to see his car parked near her home, so she would make taxi drivers take her right to her door, and she'd run to the gate as he was there so often. Eventually, due to all this going on, she didn't feel safe living alone and moved in with 2 friends of hers, one being her ex. She told Casaba to leave her alone, and according to the Irish Times, they reported that he had told her, quote, "I can see it in your eyes that we will have children together." She would also go on to say that Casaba had put a GPS on her car. This has never been established. She also told friends that if she was ever to go missing, to contact the Gardaí. The evening before the killing, Martha was looking after some children and was at the playground where Casaba approached her. That night, she was at a friend's house. His name was Victor. They had a few glasses of wine, and in the very early morning of the next day, Victor drove her home in her car before he walked back to his house. Martha said while she was outside her house, Casaba approached her and said he wanted to talk. He wanted her to take them to the beach. So they both got in the car and started driving. Casaba was screaming at her, and she claimed he put his hand on her leg, and she was afraid as they drove down Main Street in Arklow. She said her mind was unclear, but she remembers her foot hitting the accelerator and felt in that moment she could take no more. She then sped towards the end of the pier. Martha told Gardaí that she remembers being under the water, and when she emerged from the water, she remembers calling out his name, but she did not see or hear Casaba. She then swam towards the pier and climbed the ladder. But we all know that's bull anyway. The Gardaí asked her why she had not filed any complaints against Casaba to them about his concerning behaviour, and she said, quote, "I hadn't wanted to go to the Gardaí. That Polish people didn't like the police, and it wasn't an obvious or easy course of action for her to take because of this. Give me a break. There's one thing not liking the Gardaí, believe me, I know. But if I'm in trouble or fear someone, they are the first place I'd go. I know, I'm a user. Sue me." Dr. Bailey, who treated Martha at the hospital, was next on the stand. He asked her, did she know what would happen if she drove the car into the harbour? She nodded and teared up and told him she knew Casaba couldn't swim. The nurse that treated Marta also took to the stand. Marta told the nurse, quote, "I didn't give him a chance. He didn't think I'd do it." And again, she knew he couldn't swim. The nurse also said, "From the moment I attended Marta, I knew I'd end up here in court today." Marta's ex-boyfriend was up next. He said that Marta had been suspicious of his former girlfriends and perhaps a little bit jealous. He said she got on well with other men when they were together and knew she was a good swimmer. Casaba's brother Zoltan also gave evidence that Marta had turned up at Casaba's house to warn him that management were onto him over ringing in sick when he wasn't sick. It was Casaba's birthday the same day, and she stayed to celebrate with him. He told Marta that she was his birthday present. A former employee told the court that they were all working at the hotel one day, setting up for a wedding, and Marta told Casaba, pointing to the bride and groom's seats, quote, that would be them one day. The former employee stated that this was also something that Casaba had said numerous times in the past, and Marta admitted that she had said this, but it was just said light-hearted and in fun. Marta's friend Victor, who had spent practically the whole night with her the night before the killing, would then tell his side as to what happened that early morning. He said he was not in a relationship with Marta, but the two of them had kissed frequently. He said he had thought about being in a relationship with her, but it never happened. On the night before the crash, Victor said he and Marta had gone to his apartment and had some wine. At around 5 a.m, Marta insisted on going home, and Victor drove her home in her car. Marta insisted that he drive her car back, but he didn't want to. He had a 25-minute walk ahead of him, and when he got home, he had several missed calls from her, and he called her back. She asked him if he had got home all right, and he said she sounded annoyed. Victor explained that Marta hadn't wanted him to walk home, but Victor had not felt like driving again, but pretended to drive, and when Marta had gone into the house, he put the keys through the letterbox. He said it was easier to do this, as Marta was stubborn. Marta heard the keys drop through the letterbox and confronted Victor. He just then ended up storming off. He had enough of listening to her. He said when he had phoned her back that morning, he heard loud music in the background and presumed Marta was in her car. He said Marta was upset and he was a bit confused as to why Marta was looking for him, and he asked her why she was in the car, to which Marta did not reply. Again, he got fed up listening to her, said goodnight and hung up the phone. Victor admitted that after Casaba had died, that he and Marta continued to see each other casually, but eventually he moved on. He said Marta had become upset. She now realised she had feelings for him. He said she had cried on the phone to him. It sounds like our dear Martha was running out of men to adore her. You see, what I discovered in my research from sources close to both Marta and Casaba was also moving on. While Marta had not heard from him in the 3 months before his death, it gave Casaba the freedom to realise that Marta was a user, a manipulator, and an attention seeker, who picked him up when she wanted and dropped him as quick. He was done being a fool and he had met someone new. Of course, this did not go down well with our Marta, but more of that later. When Victor was asked by the defence if he knew that Casaba was stalking Marta, he said he did and offered to sort it out for her, but she refused his offer. No surprise there then. On the 14th of July, the Garda collision investigator took to the stand. He described what he had found at the scene. There was a dark skid mark on the quay after the incident. It measured up to 14 feet long. It was the type of skid mark left when a handbrake is applied and the wheels lock. It is unlike applying the pedal brakes, as ABS would kick in, and therefore the wheels would not lock. When the car had been recovered from the water, the handbrake was indeed pulled up, and the driver's side of the window was open, while all the others were closed. Then Marta's second interview, which was conducted on the 2nd of August, was read out to the jury. Marta admitted to going fast, saying she was stressed and nervous and she hadn't meant to drive there. She and Casaba had been arguing. It was an accident. She said she was not intentionally driving recklessly, that she didn't want to hurt anyone, and she herself could have died, and she didn't want to die, that she had family. Marta said she wished Casaba was still around and that it would be easier to explain what had happened if he was. Said no murderer ever trying to get away with murder. She said Casaba's attention became too much for her and she agreed she was angry with him that morning. Then CCTV was shown to her of her in the town that morning at around 5:28 a.m. She confirmed she was the only person in the car at that time. She seemed shocked that the CCTV was so clear, and with this she pulled her knees up in a fetal defensive position and started rocking while still being interviewed. The Gardaí also told her about Casaba getting into the car at her house, and she replied she didn't know. She was then asked about her phone call to Casaba at 5:20 a.m. that morning. She agreed that she probably called him to come get her. She said, quote, "I didn't have to do anything. He came to me." She also admitted again she knew Casaba couldn't swim. She didn't know why her window was open, since it was freezing outside and snowing. Also, while Casaba was wearing clothes for the season and weather that was in it, Marta wore light clothes, definitely not dressed for the winter. Marta acknowledged that she had heard that it was impossible to open a door when a car was submerged. The Garda interviewing Marta also put to her, quote, "Would you agree that Casaba is dead because of your criminally dangerous act?" Marta replied, quote, "He is dead because of his love for me. Ugh, get me a bucket." On the Wednesday morning, the 20th of July, Garda O'Brien was examined by the prosecution and outlined a portion of his interview with Marta, where he put to her that she had lured Casaba from his home that morning, that she rang him 3 times at around 5:30 a.m, and that Casaba's door had been left open. He said to her, "You rang him," suggesting her words next, "I'm outside, Casaba, come out." Marta acknowledged this and said, "Yes, that is probably what happened." Garda O'Brien continued, "You lured him out of the house and he is dead within 12 minutes. Marta responded, "This is horrible. Everyone is looking at this story at the last few seconds." She said she saw the whole thing as a series of events carried out over 2 years. Marta said she wanted the screaming to stop. Detective O'Brien piped up, "You definitely achieved your objective." Marta then said to the detective, "You don't like me." The detective said, "I feel sorry for you. You got Casaba out of bed at 5:30 in the morning and then had driven him into the river." Marta replied, "That's the most stupid thing I've ever heard, that I would want to kill someone." With the evidence concluding at the end of that Wednesday, the prosecution began closing speeches. He said that the evidence was all circumstantial, but it all pointed clearly to the conclusion Marta had used her car as a murder weapon. Marta could remember everything up to the car going into the river and everything after, but couldn't remember how Casaba had come to be in her car. Whether Marta decided beforehand or on the spur of the moment to drive the car into the water, it didn't matter, as she knew Casaba couldn't swim, and this was enough to show intent. The following day, it was the defence's turn to sum up. He said the state's case made no sense. He said to the jury that the prosecution had put to them that they might find it fanciful or far-fetched, that Marta would drive herself and Casaba into the water and put her own life at risk to kill someone. He said he found this an amazing proposition, that Marta would do this. It would be committing suicide. He admitted that Casaba was probably the one that pulled the handbrake, but this was not proof of guilt. He said that the most Marta should be charged with is dangerous driving causing death, but that was not a charge before them, and it was the prosecution that had not included it. He said that all his client wanted to do was to maintain friendly relationships with the men around her. Even though Kasaba's behaviour was worrying, that was not a crime. On Friday, the 22nd of July, the judge gave his instructions to the jury. The jury had 3 options open to them: guilty of murder, not guilty of murder but guilty of manslaughter, and not guilty. The following Monday, the jury began their deliberations, spending 3 hours behind closed doors before being sent home for the night. The next day, another 3 hours were spent deliberating. On the 3rd day, the jury were told by the judge that a majority verdict would be accepted, and they were sent home again. On Thursday, the 28th of July 2016, after 8 hours and 11 minutes, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Marta Herda guilty of murdering Kasaba Oris by a majority of 11-1. Marta had no reaction to the verdict, but lost her composure when everyone rose briefly before sentencing. Marta wept uncontrollably as she was comforted by friends and her legal team. None of her family were there in court at the time. The judge then handed down the mandatory life sentence, and before Marta was brought to the Docus Centre in Mountjoy, a victim impact statement was read out by a Garda on behalf of Kasaba's brother and family. He said he was haunted by having to identify his brother's body. He had flashbacks and nightmares, and had to explain to his son, who was 3 at the time, why he was always crying. He said his whole family had been traumatised, and he had not been able to return to work. He said Kasaba just wanted to be happy. He just wanted a wife, children, and a family of his own. He will never have this now because he is dead. After the trial was over, Kasaba's brother spoke with the newspaper outside the court. He said he had encouraged Kasaba to pursue Marta at first, but when she rejected him and saw how she treated him afterwards, he changed his mind about her. She would flirt with him and touch him and felt that Marta was leading him on. She wanted attention from him, but didn't want a relationship with him. He told Kasaba to let her go, but he told him he was in love with Marta. In January 2017, Marta lodged an appeal to have her conviction overturned and applied for bail while she waited on her appeal. The bail hearing was set for April, but the application failed. The appeal itself opened up in July, and in October the 3-judge panel returned with their decision. It was denied. Marta again turned on the waterworks, and her family and friends comforted her. She was then returned to prison. The case was then brought to the Supreme Court, and in May 2018, the Supreme Court refused to hear the appeal. There was no point of law of general importance raised in the appeal documents, nor was there an appeal necessary in the interest of justice. Most of the grounds of appeal that had been put forward the year before had all been addressed and rejected. One of the points put forward was the lack of interpreters during the Garda interviews, but it was said this was not brought up by the defence during the trial as an issue, and the defence had accepted everything that was said in the interviews by the Gardaí. Marta came across as very articulate and had a good command of the English language until it suited her not to. She had spent 7 years working and dealing with English-speaking clients, and she even stood in as an interpreter for any new foreign staff at the Brook Lodge Hotel. Marta's family still fight to this day and want to bring her case to the European Court of Human Rights. There is no update on how this is going for them, nor, to be honest, do I care. I do know that in 2022, she was granted permission to return to Poland to serve out the rest of her sentence there. I know from what I've heard here, the taxpayers are glad to see the back of her. Let Poland look after their own murderers. I'm unsure if she has been moved as yet. I couldn't find anything on her. So you might be asking yourself, or me for that matter, were things as bad for Marta as she made them out to be when it came to Kasaba and what she was accusing him of? I came across an article which made a very interesting read, and it confirmed to me that she is exactly where she should be. Sources close to both Marta and Kasaba who were in their immediate group would tell the true tale of the relationship. It was revealed that Marta had a way of waving her wand over men. But after continuous rebuffs, over more than 2 years, Casaba was giving up. He had even asked another woman out for a coffee, which did not sit well with Marta. It proved to be a fatal mistake. The key source to this information did not attend trial and left Ireland soon after Casaba's death. Sources said, "It would wreck your head trying to analyse Marta. This was a psychopathic act. She could have been killed herself. She had no guarantees." But Marta seemed to have an undying belief in her ability to execute her objective. You would have to say she almost committed the perfect murder. Martha was also described as a skillful driver. She was equated to a rally driver by friends because of how competent she was behind the wheel. The young people that all worked together in Brook Lodge Hotel told Gardaí that a lot of what Marta claimed when it came to Casaba was rubbish, and this is what made Marta's defence unravel. Marta tried to make herself a victim, going for sympathy and blackening Casaba's name. She called Casaba a stalker, a rapist, and someone who refused to leave her alone. She also knew that death by drowning would be tapping into Casaba's worst fear. He had multiple surgeries on his ears. He couldn't swim, and as a result stayed away from water. The reality was Casaba wouldn't have hurt a hair on her head. He ran around after her, for her, and he was very good to her. Casaba was an honourable, loving man, but he loved the wrong woman, and he paid for that with his life. I would call Marta a femme fatale and a murderer.